Hey guys, remember to like the video and hit subscribe.
And we are going to debate these issues largely from a legal context. And to kick it off, I think one of the biggest stories we've seen in the past couple of weeks has been the deportation or the revocation of visas from students, from activists, protesters, and people with actual legal status in this country. Notably, Trump revoked the legal status of 530,000 immigrants who actually came here legally under a program started by Joe Biden. So we'll talk about that and a whole lot more. We got a couple gentlemen joining us to engage in this debate. Sir, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Pisco. I'm an attorney. I do streams on YouTube. Pisco's Hour.
Well, right on.
Yeah.
And what's your view? You love Trump.
No, I hate Trump. I think that Trump is doing an awful thing to the Constitution. But in this case specifically, I think that there are a lot of conservatives that care about the First Amendment, or at least purport to care about the First Amendment. And there's on-point precedent from the Supreme Court that resident aliens get First Amendment rights. So why is Donald Trump doing the bidding of Israel and attacking the First Amendment rights of, for example, a green card holder who did nothing more than just indicate their view as to the situation in Palestine? It's completely unjustifiable.
Right on, sir. You want to grab that mic and pull it up?
Yeah, sure. Joe Newman, aka Good Logic. I host a YouTube channel and Rumble channel called Good Logic. I'm a New York litigator who turned podcaster after COVID. I'm a massive free speech advocate, so much so that I actually sued Judge Merchan for his unconstitutional gag order of President Trump in pro se, in my own name, because I felt that the violation of his First Amendment right to speak was harming my First Amendment right to cover it as a member of the press. And I took that all the way up and applying to the Supreme Court. But on this particular issue, it's about Mahmoud Khalil, and this is not a First Amendment issue. Sometimes a free speech issue is a First Amendment issue. Often it is, but this is not a situation like that. I look forward to getting into it with you.
Right on. Well, everybody make sure to smash the like button. Share the show if you do want to hear this debate, or if you think people should hear this debate. It'll get particularly interesting. Not just the immigration issue, but of course there's a whole bunch of other issues, as you already brought up with the courts and how it affects Trump in this country. But let's just kick it off, man. Tell us what you think. Let me give a little bit of context. So Mahmoud Khalil, he was one of the organizers of the protests we saw in Colombia. He had I believe it was a 2-year conditional green card, which got revoked by the State Department. He is currently pending deportation, but he's not the only one. I think there may be 4 others. These are individuals who are here on legal status with legal visas, who are now having their visas revoked and facing deportation. The Trump administration says that Mahmoud was engaged in activities aligned with Hamas, and that was a national security threat. So there's a lot more to the story, but why don't you tell us?
Yeah, let's first start with what it's not about. It's not about criminal activity. It's not about alleged crimes. I think both of you can agree that we have to take the allegations of the government. We can't invent new rationales for why Mahmoud Khalil is deportable. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to hear anything from people in the comments saying he occupied, he helped occupy, or that he's giving material support to Hamas. If the government does not allege that he's giving material support to Hamas, why should we at all assume that he is and invent new rationales for deporting him? And obviously there's no evidence that he's in connection with Hamas or giving any material support to them. So I think that the first point is some agreement that we only discuss the allegations and the actual basis of removability for Mahmoud Khalil.
I want to be clear before we begin this, so we frame our discussion in a healthy way. Whether we're talking about this from a legal perspective, or from a moral perspective, or philosophical American culture type of perspective, we can attack this as attorneys and talk about whether or not what's happening here and who's in the right and who's in the wrong. Or we can attack this as far as from a moral and philosophical perspective. And I want to make sure that we're both on the same page, so that we don't jump back and forth. That I'll make a point about the law and you'll say philosophically that's wrong. Or I'll make a point about philosophically and you'll come back to the law. So can we pick one? And because I'm sure that Khalil loses on any of those, any way you look at it, philosophically, legally, or as far as American constitutional perspective, like what's a healthy philosophy of our Constitution, he loses every way. So you pick the direction you want to go, and let's go there.
So to be clear, you're not willing to concede the legal argument here.
Which legal argument are you?
It is the First Amendment argument. You're not going to concede it.
That this is a First Amendment argument?
You're not going to concede that Trump is violating the First Amendment by
not even close.
Okay, so let's deal with that first, because I think you would agree that if you thought that the First Amendment was being violated by Trump, you would have to condemn him, wouldn't you?
I would.
Yeah, because the First Amendment's important to you. You just said that you went through all
I went all the way to the Supreme Court.
So let's start there, and I think that would get into some, perhaps some philosophical territory. I'm not willing to shy away from that. I think it's also, a good idea, morally, practically, to have the First Amendment. But let's stick with the First Amendment. Okay. And so I guess my first question for you is: do you think Mahmoud Khalil, a legal permanent resident, let's take the strongest case, do they have First Amendment rights? Yes or no?
Quick caveat: he wasn't a permanent resident. He had a conditional 2-year green card.
Sure, but do you want to assume for the purpose of hypothetical that he is a permanent resident?
No, I would.
What is a conditional 2-year green card? Can somebody tell me what that means? You don't know. Why down low, bro?
I'm not assuming anything, because you're saying he's acting unconstitutionally to change the nature of as far as what the actual set of facts are.
He has a conditional green card, which basically means you have to reapply after 2 years to get like the 10-year green card visa. But for all intents and purposes, he is an LPR, and he has the government has cleared him to stay in this country. He just needs to go through a couple extra procedures to make sure that it's not a sham marriage, that kind of thing.
Are you willing to concede the fact that he obtained that green card through deceitful and illegal means?
No, I'm not. Not at all. That's a pretext. But why don't we stick to the initial issue, which is, does he even have First Amendment rights?
Oh, so I'd say is the First Amendment rights that he enjoys, like any illegal alien, do exist and are not nearly the same level as the rights an American citizen has.
So to be clear, I want to see what you think. You agree that LPRs, lawful permanent residents, even though it's conditional status, I understand that, have First Amendment rights. That is correct, right?
I don't know. I agree that the Supreme Court has said that there is some level of First Amendment rights. But ask yourself this: why? Why do they have any First Amendment rights? Why do we give them civil liberties?
Oh my God. Do you see the movement? Like, he can't just answer the question. Do they have, he's like, well, according to the Supreme Court, they have First Amendment rights. So you don't agree then? They don't. That's a weasel, by the way, but.
Why has the Supreme Court granted them those liberties, which were created for the protection of American citizens? So why is it, and for the benefit of American, right? Because you recognize our government was created by, for, and of the people.
It says we the people.
And the people are citizens, correct?
No, that's not true. The Constitution is clear where it wants to refer to persons and people and where it refers to citizens. For example, in the 14th Amendment, there's a privileges or immunities clause. It speaks about the privileges or immunities of citizens. When it's talking about the
Also, I know he would say he was just not being eloquent in his speech, but it's really funny because I know for a fact that Good Logic would be one of those guys who's like, our rights are, the government only exists to protect our rights. We don't get rights from the government. The government only exists to protect the rights that we already have. The rights come from our creator, okay? I like how Good Logic is like, the government is literally the thing that gives us our rights, and the government doesn't give any rights to illegal, that's whatever.
Requirements for who's the president or for who is a senator, it says citizen. When it says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, or for example, the right of the people to be free from, in their papers, persons, and effects from.
Oh yeah, also notice how he did exactly what he was saying he didn't want to do at the very beginning, which is when he jumped immediately from the law right to the philosophy of like, well, why do these things even exist? Right, that's funny, yeah.
Reasonable searches and seizures. That's referring to persons. And there was a concept of personhood that was broader than citizenship from the attorneys who founded this country and made the Constitution. They were smart people.
So I just want to add, I actually agree. We've had this come up many times on our show. The 4th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, semicolon, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So what we've highlighted often is that it draws a distinction between persons and citizens, specifically identifying initially all persons born, later on the clarification of what makes someone a citizen. So there's two distinct definitions here. The reason this has come up is actually the pro-life, pro-choice abortion debate in the question of whether or not an unborn child is a person. Interestingly, and I don't mean to be hyperpartisan on this one, but when it comes to the liberal faction, they actually disagree with my assessment on this, arguing that no, it's referring to citizens, and if you're not born, you're not a citizen, because when you get to the question of is the unborn a person, this clearly would protect the life of that person who is not yet a citizen, not yet born.
Yeah, I think that's a cop-out. I think that the courts ultimately will have to determine as a legal matter what is a person, what does that mean
I
for
agree.
purposes of constitutionality. Now, it could be that the originalist interpretation of person as understood at the time that the Constitution was framed only involved born alive persons. That's not an inconsistent position. Or it could be the case that that the people who founded this country would have considered a person to be someone who is in utero. So I don't pretend to know the actual legal analysis here, but I'm glad, Tim, that you agree that even the First Amendment, let's take a look at the First Amendment, doesn't refer to persons or citizens. It says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Respecting an establishment, I think.
Of religion.
If we could just look for a moment, at what Tim just read with respect to the 14th Amendment, and the language there is important, and you read it quickly, and I understand why. But there's a distinction there as far as between citizens and persons in that 14th Amendment. And what is promised to persons, those who are not citizens? What's promised them is life, liberty, and due process, not the civil rights in general. So to say that applies, it actually is implicitly against your position. It's actually going to the point that citizens specifically are the ones.
Like, just think about this for a moment. First of all, there's no shot there's any Supreme Court case that would back up this insane and unhinged position. But you're telling me that lawful permanent residents have absolutely no freedom of speech? So like a cop could hear an LPR say, "F you," and the cop could arrest them, and then they could get convicted of a crime because they have no First Amendment rights? Like, do we have a whole separate body of law just for lawful permanent residents? Like, this is just on its face such an outlandish and absurd statement. Like, what are you talking about?
Ones who have crafted for them our civil liberties, and the only protections that America is willing to afford to those people who are not citizens of this country is life, liberty, and due process.
Well, clearly the Supreme Court disagrees with you. You acknowledge the Supreme Court disagrees with you.
What I'm saying is,
do you acknowledge that, yes or no?
I agree that with we talk
Yes or
about
no,
the Wixon case that you're thinking of recognizes that there are some civil liberties that are afforded to people who are
Including
not
in that
citizens.
case specifically the First Amendment. Is that right?
So, yes.
Okay. And it's
Yes, you're wrong. Yes, the 48 Supreme Court case that we looked at yesterday. I think, yeah, he's just.
Just the First Amendment. There's procedural due process cases that aliens have access to. I'm using the term alien here because that's the term used in the
Because it's the proper term.
term.
It's the proper term. That's why. Right.
I don't think it's a nice thing to
Your
call someone
audience
an
is
alien,
not offended, don't
but
worry.
listen, I want to be accurate here. It says that aliens have access to, for example, you can't just throw them out of the country summarily. There are procedural due process issues, even
We have the
people here
APA.
illegally. Well, not even in absence of the Administrative Procedures Act. There's a constitutional notion of procedural due process that has purchase on persons, and
As said in the 14th Amendment,
and
they're entitled to due process.
in the Fifth Amendment against the federal government, which is what is at issue here, what you just said and what you acknowledge is, despite what you might think about why the country was formed, the consistent case law has been that persons in this country have access to a lot of civil liberties. I don't know why we wouldn't extend it to the First Amendment if you acknowledge there's case law on point about it. And specifically when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Right, and the Supreme Court has recognized, while they recognize the First Amendment right, they also have equally recognized that the First Amendment right of someone who's visiting this country are not as robust as the protections that American citizens have. Do you admit that?
I'm not so sure. For people already admitted into the country. So there's a difference that I acknowledge that the country makes between exclusion matters and for people who are in the country. The key example of this, by the way, are the Chinese exclusion cases. I'm sure that you guys, maybe your audience is not familiar, but there was a point that the first restricted immigration laws in this country, up until 1870 thereabout, we had open borders policy in this country. Complete open borders, except for the Alien Enemies Act and the Alien Friends Act, which maybe we'll get to.
This is actually pretty interesting because it actually functioned this way well after the 1800s. I went to San Diego and was talking with people on both sides of the border. And it's actually, I think in the past I don't know, what, 50, 60 years, where the border became heavier. And it used to be, even up to like the early 1900s, you could just walk into San Diego back and forth. Only recently, I guess, with national security concerns, communications, and population density, has it become much more rigid.
Yeah, that's totally correct. And the first restrictive immigration laws were against Chinese people. It said, well, the first it was vagrants and stuff, but ultimately it said Chinese people, if you're of Chinese or Asian descent, you can't enter the country. And that case has not been overturned. And you acknowledge that. So I recognize. I hope
I'm not sure what your point is as far as that case not being overturned. As if that's still binding law today.
So the point is, I recognize, even though I may disagree, that, and it's interesting, I think that Trump did not argue that it actually was a Muslim ban and seemed to assume that a Muslim ban when he instituted his travel ban would be unconstitutional. So I don't know how viable that precedent is. But in the Chinese exclusion cases, that there is a difference in the law between an exclusion matter and someone who's in the country. So no, I actually don't recognize, and I don't know that to be the case, that individuals in this country, even if they're not permanent residents, don't have First Amendment rights.
Well, you should review Trump v. Hawaii. You should review Reno versus AATC. There's been a myriad of Supreme Court cases which have recognized the fact that those who are visiting this country, not simply when they're abroad, that we're going to give. I don't know what type of free speech limitations you think that they would be. That we're not going to promise free speech to some foreigner who's out in Greenland or well, Greenland soon to be America, but who's out in the UK and say that we recognize that they have a right to speak. That doesn't even mean anything.
So then here's the question:
What free speech? What right to speak? It's that Congress shall pass no laws infringing on a right to speak. And what are we talking about foreigners for? What are you even referring to here? Hello?
If Trump issued an order tomorrow and said, if you're a Jew, your student visa is being revoked.
Right.
Would that be constitutional or not? Yes,
absolutely
no?
not.
Why not?
Because the threshold minimum, because and here's the thing. I've allowed you to engage this conversation in good faith as if this is about First Amendment rights, when this is not at all a First Amendment issue. This is purely an immigration issue. And this is what I was saying with respect to the fact that while I'm a free speech advocate, I don't think that this in any way touches on free speech or in the concept of First Amendment rights.
Just as another reminder, conservatives have no values and no principles. They don't believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in freedom of expression. They don't care about any of that shit, as long as they agree with me. As long as they agree with me, then I protect their rights. Otherwise, you. Don't ever think these people, if you call them that, are anything different than that, okay?
And the reason it doesn't is because when you're talking about immigration law, that is where government powers are at their zenith, as opposed to when you're talking about the First Amendment rights of individuals.
Government I don't even like the terms he's using. Government power? What part of the government are we talking about here? Like the government in its totality? Because Congress has a lot of ability and leeway to pass legislation related to immigration, sure. I think he meant specifically not to talk about immigration, but to talk about national security issues, and not to talk about the government, but explicitly the executive branch or the president. I think that's what he meant to invoke there, but we're pretty wishy-washy with our terms here, I feel, but
First Amendment rights of someone who's merely visiting this country are at their nadir. So what you're trying to postulate here is that this individual whose rights are lower than yours or mine, whose rights are not as robust with respect to his First Amendment rights, is now challenging the decision-making powers of the President of the United States with respect to international affairs and national security, which is where the Constitution carves out the strongest powers and protections and says this is the exclusive domain of the executive branch. That is what you're in conflict here and saying this is unconstitutional.
If it's true for free speech, it's true of the religion clauses. The immigration plenary power framework that you've just laid out would apply just as strongly to religion, free speech, which is in the First Amendment, as to the religion clauses that are in the First Amendment.
Here's why he's wrong. If I could just correct that. Now, the reason you're mistaken about that is because the Supreme Court, in its insight, has pointed out that the threshold that you have to meet on an immigration issue is that it has to be facially legitimate and bona fide. Facially legitimate and bona fide. So if you talk about some law that the president would throw out there saying, I don't want any more black people coming into this country, or Muslims or Jews or redheaded Irish people, that is not facially legitimate and bona fide, and it wouldn't pass that.
What if he says Muslims are more likely to do terrorist acts?
And who's the one to determine? Careful. Because who determines if it's facially bona fide or whatever? So are you saying that other people do have the ability to look at what the president is saying? Because that sounds like something that would be reviewable then by a court, right?
If he says Muslims, so that's not. If he says that as Muslims, if he says terrorists, that's
he said Muslims are more likely to commit terrorist acts, and it's facially legitimate.
To me, that's not facial. I don't see how that would be.
Oh, to me, it's not. Oh, okay. Well, far be it from me. Oh my God.
Because to say that everyone who's a member of this religion, which is being practiced by over 1 billion people, is a terror threat, is not facially legitimate and bona fide.
Why is it facially legitimate to say anyone who advocates in support of, even just assume, I do not take it for granted, I just want to be clear, I don't take it as a fact that Mahmoud Khalil supports Hamas. I don't take that as a fact. Let's assume he does. Okay. Why is it facially legitimate to say that what would be, I think you would agree, free speech for citizens, I think you've agreed that LPRs have First Amendment rights. What's the legitimacy in targeting what otherwise would be clearly protected speech?
Just one, what was LPR?
Lawful permanent resident.
Green card holder.
Right. So the difference, I would definitely agree that all the actions that we know of that Mahmoud Khalil has taken, if it was taken by an American citizen, that the government would be completely out of bounds and wrong for in any way infringing on that. At the same time,
I got to ask you, does the First Amendment pertain to illegal activities?
No.
Sorry.
Well, it defines the scope of what is and what's not legal sometimes. For example, so the First Amendment, if there were a law that said it's illegal to talk to your neighbor, it's illegal to hand out pamphlets in support of Donald Trump, even though there's a law that says it's illegal to do criminality, the Constitution supersedes. And so to the extent that there's an application of law, for example, in the INA that purports to make something illegal, or it would have no purchase if it conflicted with First Amendment precedent.
Did Mahmoud Khalil occupy any buildings illegally?
There's no allegations to that effect, and so why should we consider it? There's no allegation of that. In fact, there's reporting that says that he purposely did not attend any of these sit-ins for the reason of he's worried about the status of his green card.
I could be wrong, but there were conversations and videos, I believe, that showed Mahmoud Khalil inside buildings that had been under quote-unquote student occupation.
At the time they were occupied, or any time?
At the time they were occupied.
Okay, well, listen.
I could be wrong, though.
I read reporting that said that effectively that he was keeping away from those areas, but
For accusations and for court, this is why it's so important to have like a formal process. One might even say due process to evaluate these things, is because media reports and who knows what's true or what's not true, whatever. If it's in front of a judge, though, right? These are formal documents that are submitted that both sides have a right to and the ability to look through and determine, the factuality of them, or to fight against the factuality of them if they want. But this is the issue of not having any kind of due process. Was he there? Was he not? I don't know. Who knows? The government didn't make the charge. There's no court process. There's no due process. We have no idea. We have no way to even arbitrate that that disagreement.
even if it were true, don't you agree that Trump, if he wants to do that, he should charge him with, or he should get someone to charge him with a crime?
Yeah.
Because in this country, there's a line between admissibility basis of removal and deportable basis of removal. And in order to be deportable on the basis of something like, for example, occupying a building, I assume he would need a conviction under that.
No. I'll tell you right now, it would be much worse if Trump had charged him with a crime. If his DOJ went out and charged him with a crime, I would be much more bothered by the action, because that would now be because that would be punishing him for his free speech. The Supreme Court has said definitively that deportation and removal is not considered a punishment. I urge you to check. I'll give you the citations: 525 U.S. 471. The case is Reno versus Anti-American Discrimination Committee or Commission. That case spells out very clearly you cannot pretend first and foremost that it is considered criminal punishment, and also that he's held.
I agree. I agree that immigration is not a criminal punishment.
So that's
I totally agree that that's the precedent of the court.
So then ask yourself this: how is it a First Amendment violation at all?
First Amendment does not just arise under criminal actions. For example, if the government said that you can't get a liquor license if you're a Jew, or you can't get a liquor license if you support Trump, I think that you would agree that's not a criminal action, but the First Amendment still has purchase. And yes or no?
Is that a yes? Bona fide.
Wait, is that yes?
You're trying to catch me on a gotcha.
He won't even answer questions. I hate God. It's so bad faith. Just answer. You won't even answer a question. Just answer that question, and then go on to the rest of your answer. He won't even answer it because he's
action, but the First Amendment still has purchase. And yes or no?
Is that a yes? Bona fide.
Wait, is that yes?
You're trying to catch me on a gotcha.
You just said it was only for criminal matters, and I just want to be clear to the audience: is it only for criminal matters?
What I'm saying is that with respect to someone who's an illegal alien, we are talking about whether or not it's bona fide, it's facially
not an illegal alien
and legitimate.
He's not an illegal alien.
I'm saying it's someone who's not an American citizen.
Oh my God, what a slip of the tongue. Oh my God. An illegal alien. Oh, I didn't mean illegal. I just meant anyone who's not like an actual citizen. Oh, okay. So it's all the same in your head? What an unbelievable.
Let me ask you guys for clarification, because the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 221, subsection I, says after the issuance of a visa or other documentation to any alien, the consular officer or the Secretary of State may at any time, in his discretion, revoke such visa or other documentation. There's more to that. There's exceptions. I don't know that I need to read the whole thing. I think you're both familiar with this. So how does this pertain to Mahmoud?
Yeah. So there's wide deference in this country for the Secretary of State, for the Attorney General, for the Department of Homeland Security, for the President himself to make all kinds of decisions that would prejudice his right to be in this country. I don't deny that there's the case law is that there's no substantive right for non-citizens to be in this country. That Congress tomorrow could pass a law that says everyone who's not a citizen needs to leave. You don't have a substantive right to be here. But here's the question. Can you do it for illegitimate purpose that's reprehensible under the Constitution? Using the statute, not saying that the statute itself is unconstitutional facially, but as applied, could you say, for example, in my discretion, because you are a Jew, I am taking away your visa? The answer is no, right?
Well,
would you agree?
So far, what I've gotten from what you're saying is that
I'm not going to read over this whole case because I don't have the time. But this guy cited this Reno versus American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee lawsuit. Note the differences. So one, this had to do with 8 resident aliens who were members of the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was a group. I think this might have been one of the organizations that was flying planes into buildings. I think the PFLP was. I think the DFLP is another one. This is what Bad Bunny was wearing I think the headband of. I think it was for the PFLP. This is a group, okay? And these were 8 resident aliens who were members of that group, okay? And their deportation was ordered. Even though none of the 8 had been accused of committing a criminal act, in response, they filed suit. So they did have the ability, at least initially, to file a lawsuit challenging this, saying that federal officials had targeted them because of their political opinions and political affiliation, a violation of freedoms protected by the First Amendment. But Congress then enacted the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which eliminated judicial review of the Justice Department's deportation proceedings against several classes of aliens. There are so many other facts that are different here than just the President of the United States has unilaterally decided that he's going to deport some dude with absolutely no review whatsoever and no ability for them to challenge anything. Like,
that sounds like the reason the Trump administration has not accused him of a crime pertaining to those protests and has simply cited national security concerns is to avoid a hearing based on the arguments you're making.
Yeah, that's reprehensible, isn't it?
Well,
No,
I mean,
that's not what happens.
but the issue is,
If it's true, would it be reprehensible to we're really doing this for the crime, but we're kind of sneaking it in? Wouldn't that be?
I don't know that they're actually doing it for the crime. I'm saying, if Donald Trump said we don't want people who are not citizens to
Mahmoud Khalil for actual criminal acts, but he's just trying to do it faster through this other method.
well, there's a lot in there. The word punish, for instance. If I don't want to ascribe anything, and what I'm trying to get at is, if Donald Trump were to say we need pretext to remove this man, he's going to find himself in 1A hearings.
Would he find himself an enemy of you, or would you condemn him for coming up with pretext to remove people or to punish people?
But again, just to clarify, because I want to make sure we get the full point before we get into that. The issue appears to be that the Secretary of State has the legal right for any reason in his own discretion at any time to revoke an alien's visa.
Under the law, but as applied, could they violate the Constitution? So I'll ask you, Tim, if he said, in my discretion, I'm going to revoke the visa because he's a Jew, you think that would be illegal?
To revoke someone's visa for...
Pisco is going to know more than me, obviously, on legal shit. But I think the topic that Pisco is centering on has to do with being viewpoint neutral, which makes it not a violation of the First Amendment. So, for instance, I think you could say that the Secretary of State has the right to remove an immigrant for any reason, right? So the Secretary of State could say, hey, I'm revoking your visa because I think you're an asshole. And in that case, I think that the Secretary of State might have the right to do that. But if the Secretary of State said, hey, I'm revoking your visa because you gave a speech about how you wanted to support the Democrats, you wouldn't be allowed to do that because I don't think that's a viewpoint neutral consideration. And if it's not viewpoint neutral, then it's considered a violation of your freedom of speech, I believe is the case.
For being a Jew.
Correct. In the exercise of discretion, would you say, for example, well, it says he can revoke it for any reason. Would you say that's legal?
It's a good question. What I would say is...
You can say I don't know.
I do want to address it real quick because my answer is I don't know, because you have two areas. One where the law literally says for any reason, but then you run into the constitutional argument where that law can't be applied as it goes to the First Amendment.
So Tim,
I don't know.
But doesn't the threshold the Supreme Court laid out that for some reason you just want to toss it, you want to just disregard completely when you give a crazy example of let's ban all Jews, let's ban all Muslims, let's ban all redheads, is that facially legitimate and bona fide? You seem to keep just walking, like dancing right past that.
I'm not. Wait, I acknowledge that the
Chinese hypotheticals are a joke because of that.
So
they don't meet that very tiny threshold.
So I want to be very clear. I started that entire conversation by saying the Chinese exclusion laws are still good law. And even though I don't necessarily agree with them. Wait, you think that Chinese exclusion laws are good law?
What I'm saying is that as of today, you think it's legal today to exclude Chinese?
Immigration lawyers cite that case repeatedly, all the time, with respect to these kind of issues with constitutionality. Che Ching-ping, Fang Wei-ting, these are cases that the Supreme Court is, they constantly are cited there. They have not developed anti-precedent status yet. And because you accused me of dancing around that issue, I started that conversation by saying and recognizing the law, which says that by the law those cases have not been overturned. What I said was that's an exclusion decision. That's an exclusion decision that's different than when you're in the interior of the country.
So I have a question for you guys, and I have two questions. The first one's extremely obvious. If a black man walked into a bakery and they said, we don't serve black people, that is illegal.
That's illegal under the the civil rights framework.
Right.
It's private discrimination, different situation.
Right. So in the instance where the individual walks into the store and the owner says, sir, we reserve the right to refuse service to anybody, please leave. Yeah. Well, that's not an issue of racism or a violation of the civil rights.
Oh, Tim, nice. Wow. You just stumbled into that. That's correct. That should be fun.
That's a great example, Tim, and I really appreciate it because that goes to show you the extent to which, the government actually has latitude in all kinds of... They could have done it through another means. They could have said, we're doing it because of this bullshit about the lie, which we can get into on your green card application. They could have found some other means. They could have charged them with a crime with a neutral ground, but they didn't. The reason they said it's because you support Hamas is because they're trying to signal, they're trying to bully private actors, just like they're doing with the universities, just like they're doing with the firms, just like we're doing with all these actors. They're trying to put a signal and say, hey, if you disagree with us on policy on Israel, we're going to make you hurt. And so you're right. If they actually thought he was a security threat, why not go through the other methods of doing so? But they said it specifically, and Rubio's coming out.
So this is about the Jews? That's what it's about?
Listen, you agree. This is about authoritarianism and coercion. Donald Trump doesn't give a about the First Amendment.
Oh my God! You see, this is
he's suing a pollster.
I'm so tired of leftists just coming to these conclusions. As far as I can look inside his head, and I know better than anyone.
I hate him, dude. I can't do this guy. Just as a quick thing. When Good Logic says his case went to the Supreme Court, I'm just curious if he's lying about this. When he says his case went to the Supreme Court, did it go to the United States federal level Supreme Court, or does he just mean the First Court of Appeals in New York State? Does anybody know? I'm actually curious on that. Also, I'm grabbing water. Hold on 1 second. Oh God. In case you didn't know, we said this a million times, but in New York State, their First Court of Appeals is called the Supreme Court. I don't know why. So I'm curious if does he actually have a case that went to the United States Supreme Court? Or is it just like I just want to know. Jesus.
Exactly what Trump is really thinking. Even though I've seen policy after policy that is issued that has had nothing to do whatsoever with reaching the conclusions I've reached, I'm still going to come out here and tell you I know what he's thinking. He doesn't care about the First Amendment. He doesn't care about due process. He only cares about himself. You can see one piece of evidence after another about this, and you're going to come out there and you're going to say to yourself, "Oh no, I know better than you." Everyone else, why? Because I'm sitting here on the outside. Even though I've been tilted and come across him every single way, I'm going to look at any way I possibly can to frame it against him.
There is no other explanation.
Anyway, I'm trying oh my God. So Trump sued a couple of people who did polls he didn't like. So what? Oh my God. So Trump is sued basically basically every single social media company because they banned him on Facebook. Oh my God. So Donald Trump is writing executive orders targeting lawyers just because they happen to have worked with Mueller in the past. Oh, come on. That's really a First Amendment violation. You really think it's anti-free speech, bro? Okay, so he's trying to sue NBC or whatever because he doesn't like a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala. Okay, well, maybe that wasn't right. Give me a break, dude. Holy shit.
There is no other explanation. If they thought it was because of his criminal conduct, they would say so. If they thought it was, and now they have this bullshit pretext about.
No, what they said was.
Oh, okay. So it did go to the United States Supreme Court at least. All right.
If they thought it was because of his criminal conduct, they would say so. If they thought it was, and now they have this bullshit pretext about.
No, what they said was, let's look at what they did say. What they said was that we consider him a national security issue. What is the proper procedure to do under that issue, under that setting? And the proper procedure is laid out in the APA that I started with, that you wanted to just jump away from. The APA and the steps that they were actually taking was saying we're going to process him through an administrative immigration judge, and he's going to examine this to make sure that we are not just capturing him, throwing a bag over his head, and
like they're doing with the Venezuelans.
Yes.
And like they're doing with the Venezuelans.
Yes.
I don't know. Like they're doing with the Venezuelans,
not
not even giving them the opportunity.
Oh my God, he's about to say, I don't know anything about that. He's going to do the thing. He's about to do the thing. Oh, where's that? There's some meme, right? Where the guy, he's very slowly turning, he's pulling out the, I don't know anything about that, bro. Oh, and you're just absolutely obliterated. Dude, me, man.
File habeas petitions.
What I'm
it's
saying
disgusting. You're defending this regime.
Habeas petitions are not. You're not entitled to a habeas petition the moment you get arrested.
But
A habeas
Court of
petition.
Appeals
That's you're mistaken. Supreme Court does not allow you to just automatically get a habeas petition. You cannot get it under 1252G, I believe. You cannot go to the federal district court until such time as you've exhausted
They said
all
we
the
don't even need to
administrative
send them
process.
notice. They said we didn't even need to send these people that were throwing bags over their heads, going to the tarmac and trying to get them off the plane before the court opens. They said we don't even need to, in court, by the way, in court, they said we don't even need to tell their lawyers where they're at. We don't even need to give them notice of the basis of their removal.
Well, yes, correct. I love Brian, okay? I love Brian Tyler Clone, okay? But I'm glad that Piscu's like read these. He knows what's happening. Yes, those two things are huge because the government said, listen, if you want to challenge this shit in court, go for it. And then the lawyers are saying, okay, the problem is one, you're literally deporting people without even telling them first, so they don't even know. And two, we don't even know where the fuck they're being held because you won't tell us. How the fuck can you help those people? There's no way to even do anything. Yes.
You're making
the fact that you would defend this criminal regime and say Trump cares about rights, it's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard.
So let's just come to a conclusion here. So you agree that Mahmoud Kalul, everything's fine. Now you want to move on to the
No. I just want to
God.
be clear because what I'm telling Tim, I saw some nodding there from Tim. I want to see if you agree.
You need to develop a strategy for that. What's the fallacy name for that? It's unironically what you need to do is you need to pull a Pisco, and Pisco's not pulling a Pisco. He half pulls a Pisco, and then he goes back to pulling a Destiny, where he tries to make him answer a question, but then he goes off and he doesn't force them to answer the question. He needs to be strong on that. Like, yes or no? Was this true or false? Yes or no? Agree or disagree? Like, he needs to hold him to a point there, because Good Logic has managed to slippery slide his way like a snake out of every hard answer, basically.
Because
you saw
nodding was the Israel stuff.
Well, it seems like that is what he's trying to do. He's trying to signal 100%.
So, but I'll clarify too, because you know, one thing that frustrates me is there are I call them the Jews people, where they think everything's the Jews all the time. I think this is purely related to American foreign policy. I think this country wants to fund its foreign military operations. Israel's a strong ally. The U.S. wants to give them money, wants to be involved, wants military there. I don't think it's the Jews. I think it's a strategic location for U.S. Middle Eastern operations. And you've got these protests that are emerging and influence spreading across universities, which are counter to American foreign policy interests, largely that I disagree with. So I do think Trump is trying to send a message. That's why Romesa, I believe her name was, Ozturk, she had her visa revoked. I believe it was presumably based on a pro-Palestinian paper that was written. Now, that doesn't go to the question of whether or not they have the legal right to do it, but I think the motivation is strongly has to do with.
I mean, they're posting the Studio Ghibli of them deporting people. They're posting ASMR.
Well, I'll just real quick.
I don't know that's a little different because it's not the Israel.
I just want to say, because we talked about this last night, that's a fentanyl dealer. And
I understand, but the whole purpose is to send signals.
I think Trump is trying to trick the left by doing that into defending one of the most.
Well, I'll defend reprehensible people if it means defending our rights. Right now, yeah, I'll absolutely.
But that's the point. You're not defending our rights.
I am defending our rights.
No, it's not our rights.
Yes, it is.
Unless you're here via green card or visa, you're not defending our rights.
What a disgusting subhuman piece of shit. God, I actually hate him. He's so disgusting. God, oh, it's white people. I'm just kidding. It's not. There's racist brown people too. It's so gross. These people aren't like us. They're LPRs, bro.
Defending the rights that America decides to confer on people who are not citizens of her nation.
But you just agreed that Mahmoud Khalil has First Amendment rights. You just said.
I said they are limited First Amendment rights.
What is the First Amendment? What kind of rights would it be? That okay, you have rights, but you can't say what we want you to say, otherwise we'll throw you out of the country.
Well, let me
a right.
I have an honest question.
I'll tell you. I'll answer it. Can I answer his question?
Yeah.
How is that a right? It's a right in that he's not sitting in a prison, and I don't want him. And if
he's sitting in jail right now.
No, what I'm saying is he's.
Oh my God.
At the detention, waiting for processing.
Cold comfort.
What's cold comfort?
Cold comfort for his wife, who is now 8 months pregnant and didn't even know where he was, and obviously has a kid on the way and is trying to get information from the administration on where he is.
Just have a question for you guys. The Constitution applies to non-citizens.
Yes.
The Bill of Rights do. Can they buy guns? That's an honest question. I don't know if they can.
I think the Second Amendment, as interpreted by this court, I don't necessarily agree.
Do it.
Wait,
Do it.
I don't,
Do it.
Wait. Whoa. Listen.
Tell me they can buy guns. That's right. Load them up.
The Second Amendment is based. Listen, and I don't necessarily agree with the court's interpretation as applied in Heller and in the following case McDonald, but that is the precedent of the Supreme Court. And it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's people. In the same logic that would protect non-citizens with respect to searches and seizures, which would protect them for torture, right? You agree that the government can't inflict cruel and unusual punishment to illegal immigrants. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
You agree with that?
So
do you agree with that, yes or no?
They can't torture illegal.
They can't torture illegal immigrants, right?
I agree with
okay.
that.
And
Why? Why? I thought they didn't have any rights.
so you also agree that they can't be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures, right? Fair?
That's due process.
Okay. So why would they not be protected by the Second Amendment?
Yeah. I mean, we've bumped into this one quite a bit because,
Like, Pisco should force an answer there.
I've known for some time that the Constitution applies to all peoples here, and the reason that it does, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is that if the Fourth Amendment didn't, there'd be no Fourth Amendment. They'd be able to say, we just think you're not a citizen, so now we're going to raid your house.
How is fucking Tim is just by accident bumping into all of the best arguments? Yes. Yeah, that's why, like, without due process, you literally have no rights whatsoever. If due process isn't afforded to you, then you have no right for anything ever, because who the fuck knows, right? Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So no, you can't raid someone's house.
Oh, and he even agreed with it in the background here a good long time. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Because
you're not a citizen.
Yeah, because the protection is for an individual, not the interpretation of whether they're here legally or not. And so the question then comes to guns, because Second Amendment says the people. So I'm like, can illegal immigrants buy guns in this country?
So
I want everybody-
you're
I
saying
want-
when it says the people, that's a limitation that carves out. So you're saying because the Second Amendment says, I never really considered Tim's question before. I think it's an interesting question.
And think about the recent precedent.
I need to explain to you where I'm coming
Yeah.
from with respect
Explain
to this, with respect to illegal aliens. Because
Yes, and now, remember, good logic started this with, let's not mix like law and philosophy or morality, okay? Let's be very specific. And I was like, okay, whoa, the law, okay. Let me just tell you how I personally feel, okay?
I do believe very firmly that our Constitution, when we're first forming our government, our founders have in mind, why do we have a government in the first place? It's in order to help facilitate and secure the safety of our people. But we have this grave concern, and that concern is very obvious based on history, that once you put a government in power, however that government is run, whether it's democracy or something else, that invariably they're going to crush the people. So we're going to set up not a democracy, which we're not at all a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, and that
Oh my God, what?
Constitution will safeguard the individual from the powers that this group of individuals has given the government. And the reason we have this government here is to basically keep those citizens safe from outsiders. So we don't have
Sounds like a liberal
bans.
justice. Because
Outsiders, we have a republic, not a democracy. Like, if you were to follow this line of rationalization, okay, you're saying the founding fathers gave us a republic and not a democracy. Why are you saying that? Well, obviously to protect the rights of the people. How does a democracy threaten the rights of the people over a republic? Well, I mean, just think about it. Like in a pure democracy, you could vote people's rights away, and some people might not even have rights. And it's like, okay, so the founding fathers created a constitutional republic instead of a democracy, so that large groups of people wouldn't be able to take away the rights of small groups of people. And this was at the same time that slavery was legal, right? Do you understand how retarded this argument is? That this is like the most self-defeating, auto-collapsing argument that has ever been made in the history of all of arguments? Like, what? Holy Christ.
we're saying there's a general purpose for general welfare.
What I'm saying is,
I'm going to interpret these words
transitioning-
however I want.
I'm switching into the constitutional theory, not based on like this case here or that statute there. I'm just analyzing now. I asked in the beginning, let's talk about the law. We explored that for 30 minutes. Now,
Oh, yeah, did you?
this point, I'm talking to you as far as constitutional.
We haven't run to ground. We haven't run to ground. I want to know if Tim Pool agrees that this deportation is legitimate, or whether you're going to say you're agnostic about it. I want to know whether you think that this attempted deportation is okay to do or not.
I think it's okay to do.
Why do you think it's okay to do?
I think that this is the next question I was getting into as pertains to the Constitution. The idea that we're going to try and interpret the Constitution, to me, has become largely meaningless outside of the initial 7 articles. The construction of government makes a lot of sense. People often say, they'll say what Trump is doing or what Biden is doing is unconstitutional. They're usually referring to the Bill of Rights, which have never been universally understood ever. For instance,
What?
blasphemy and obscenity were illegal. Were literally after they ratified the Constitution, you walked outside and screamed obscenities, you'd be arrested, literally arrested. George Carlin was arrested in the 70s for swearing. Like there was no.
There have been bad times in our history where we have not been true to the Constitution.
No, but
John Adams passed the sedition.
Well, wait, hold on. What we have to understand is freedom of speech in the First Amendment doesn't mean that you can't criminalize any type of speech ever. It's more figuring out, like, well, what qualifies as speech, which is a difficult question to answer, honestly, right? So, for instance, obscenity is not considered speech, but then there comes a defining question of, like, well, what is obscenity, right? And every human being can agree that there are some things that probably should be, that probably shouldn't count as things that should be protected, right? So any adult material aimed at children, explicit like porn for children, is obscenity. There is no free speech protection there. There are certain categories of porn, I believe, that are considered obscene, and there's no free speech protections there. There are certain things that we can all also agree probably should never be protected. If I'm outside and I'm saying like, hey, John, can you go pick up that machete and go hack off Sharon's head? And then John does it, and then you come to arrest me for what? Conspiracy? You mean speech? I can't even talk anymore? What, you're going to ban words, right? Well, that conspiracy crimes are more or less just speech crimes, right? To say that there are certain types of speech that are outlawed, therefore the First Amendment doesn't exist or hasn't been used evenly. Like, there's things that are speech that are protected, and then there are things that we probably don't consider speech. Like, of course, there's going to be a determination here of what qualifies. But this is one of the reasons as well why I get so angry when Americans are like, oh, like we have freedom of speech and Europe doesn't have freedom of speech. It's like, well, hold on, it's a more complicated question than you're aware of.
Act where it literally was a crime to insult the president. All right.
So, and then it got pulled back.
Correct.
So my point is, as it pertains to the Second Amendment, our current understanding is a complete inversion from every different period throughout various generations of different moral worldviews. Notably, with DC versus Heller and then McDonald v. Chicago is when we started to get the actual. You can actually have guns. So it was surprising to me to actually learn this in the past few years because I didn't really pay attention to the gun stuff. But I looked at the map of the right to keep and bear arms pre-Heller didn't exist in this country despite a Second Amendment. You could have a dismantled, broken up piece of guns throughout your house, but it was actually legal for a state to deny you a permit to carry, deny you a permit to own, and require you to dismantle it in your own house.
Initially, the Bill of Rights did not apply us to the states. The Bill of Rights were a framework to apply to the federal government, and so that's why there's that proviso. It only affected DC, and so for the longest time there was no incorporation, is the term called, of the Second Amendment. That's why McDonald's is a case that incorporates it through the due process. But I want to push you a little bit there because it sounds like what you're suggesting is there's nothing Trump could do because it's all mushy, it's all woozy, it's all wazzy. There have been times where we disrespected that there's nothing Trump could do where you would say I don't like that because of the First Amendment. Is that true?
Let me ask you: is it constitutional to?
Wait, could you answer that question first? Well, I asked you. You were kind of like saying, the First Amendment. It's all, we never respected it anyway. Who cares about it? That's
fine. Who cares?
Okay, but what would it take for Trump to do where you would say, okay, because of the First Amendment, this is fucked up, and I'm going to call him out for on the First Amendment grounds? Is there anything he could do where you would call him out for First Amendment grounds?
So the presupposition there that I have an issue with is First Amendment grounds. I think the real question is moral grounds. I don't care about the Constitution. I care if he's doing something wrong. So
I don't care about the Constitution. If you don't care about, there's something called lame philosophy. There's something called the principle of explosion, where in a formalistic sense, what it tries to say is that if you allow a contradiction into some system of logic, then through that contradiction, you can prove any statement to be true. Because through junctions and disjunctions and bullshit. But like logically, it makes sense, right? If you allow a contradiction to exist, well, if something can be contradicted, why couldn't anything be contradicted? There must be some super system that you're referring to if this system has built-in contradictions. If you don't have any kind of consistent rule of law in this case to apply said principles, then I mean, how are you ever applying them? Now, maybe Tim could say, well, I don't care about the Constitution because I have my own personal moral framework. Okay, but a lot of people have their own personal moral framework. Law is how we distinguish between, or law is how we make commensurate everybody's different moral frameworks by boiling it down to some written thing where we say, okay, well, even if we all disagree or agree on some things morally or whatever, we all agree that these are the things that we have to follow or else the government can deprive us of our rights, right?
Even if the Constitution allows him to be evil, I'm going to call him out for being evil, if it's Trump, Biden, or otherwise.
And if the Constitution says something, for example, it says, for example, you don't care about the Constitution.
I do care about the Constitution.
But you only care about the non-rights portions of the Constitution?
Okay, my point was the Bill of Rights have been applied by those in whatever way they interpret, and then when it gets challenged to the courts reinterpret or interpret in whatever way they
care about the constitutional rights or not?
Absolutely.
So if you care about the constitutional rights, don't you care
as I interpret them?
As you interpret them.
And you interpret them differently.
Like when he says things about like, well, courts can interpret and reinterpret and blah, 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 like they kind of can, but they shouldn't. This is where the concept of stare decisis or stare decisis comes, decisis, right? Where stare decisis comes in, where courts aren't really supposed to be in the business of constantly reinterpreting themselves. Gorsuch's opinion that Gorsuch's concurrence and Loper spells out really well. Like, this is what stare decisis is supposed to mean. I don't remember all the qualifications of it, but like rulings made during ordinary times, meaning not like, oh my God, like I'm citing this one court case that happened in the middle of World War II. It's like, okay, that was extraordinary time. So it's like a string of rulings made in ordinary times by sober judges. The more you have, like, these are supposed to guide you. The collective wisdom of judges over long periods of time are supposed to guide you in how you make your future decisions. This is why the overturning of Roe v. Wade was considered kind of a big deal. He's like, wait, hold on. You're tossing a court case that we've kind of built off of for 60 years. Is a little bit bizarre, right? But these concepts are important because the Constitution is not just constantly reinterpreted every day by a new judge. That's not really true. That's not the case.
I interpret them differently.
But for example, is it cruel and unusual punishment to put a male person in a female prison?
For whom?
How did we get back to trans issues already?
Or either.
I think that it could be if you can show, for example,
Could be. We have a problem right now.
Wait, no,
We don't have a definitive
listen,
understanding.
I don't know if Pisco even knows what Tim Pool is talking about right now. He's talking about the trans person. I don't know if Pisco's aware. Maybe he is.
So it depends, because you're going to need to do research on these constitutional principles to see, to what extent is it the danger to the person that you're putting in the female prison. As I understand it, there's not an epidemic of abuse from trans people in
Pisco
male,
does know. That's right.
female
That's
prisons
good.
to
That's
female
good.
individuals.
He's got
The more
it.
likely situation. Wait. As I understand,
I'm not trying to open that issue for
yeah.
debate. The point of contention was
it's a difficult issue. But like
exactly. There's an Eighth Amendment, and we actually don't know how to apply it to certain issues.
But here we have something clear, right? Here we have something clear. You think if an American citizen did what Mahmoud Khalil did, do you think that he should be able to go to jail under the First Amendment?
Absolutely
If
not.
he was occupying a building, yes.
That's not. He didn't get charged with. Sorry.
That aside, because we have to put that aside, because the government's not alleging that, right? So
Yes.
if all that's being alleged is an
He
American
leafleted for Al-Aqsa flood.
Okay, but
That's what- that-
an
that's the
American
first
citizen can do
amendment.
that, right?
Indeed.
And if Trump threw an American citizen in jail or said that you can't get liquor license because you did that, something that's perfectly constitutional, would you call him out for First Amendment violations?
Yes.
So the only difference here is whether or not he's a resident alien or whether he's American. That's really the only difference.
Absolutely.
And you just agreed, didn't you, that resident aliens have First Amendment rights?
No.
And as he pointed out, they're limited, and that's why I asked the question about guns and cruel and unusual
You
punishment.
agreed in the guns context.
First Amendment is not the guns amendment, but it's okay.
You said, of course it's natural that you have gun rights. And so it seems like you're granted in the guns right. In fact, that's a hot take, and it's one that I respect you for. But why wouldn't you grant it in the First Amendment context?
Like I already mentioned, we could not sit here and define what cruel and unusual punishment is as per the Eighth Amendment. So you're going to assert there are certain. So the argument really just boils down to my moral worldview. That's the issue I take with the Bill of Rights and how we interpret them. As you guys are all citing legal precedent, saying the court said this and the court said that, I'm sitting here being like, the only thing that really matters is whether the majority body politic determines it to be moral or not. So, for instance, when it was a predominantly Christian nation, if you blast,
I would. This gets into like legal philosophy or whatever, which I'm not really qualified to give an opinion on. But I would argue that to some extent, judges protect you from just this like popular opinion of what's legal or what's not legal. I would argue that judges should be there to some extent to protect you from that. I would hope they're not just there to follow the mass body politic or whatever.
blasphemed, you'd find yourself in jail. If you went in public and started cussing and swearing, you'd find yourself in jail. But as we've shifted away from that moral worldview, you can now go on television and cuss up a storm like South Park did, counting how many times they swore on TV. These things change dramatically. Right now, as a society, we don't know. You've got the conservatives saying, and I use this because it's obviously a hot button issue. A judge just ruled that Trump must return two biological male individuals to a woman's prison. Women there are upset. And liberal activists say putting transgender individuals who are undergoing, who are affirmed HRT in a male prison is cruel and unusual to them. Conservatives argue the inverse. There's not going to be an accepted moral worldview between the two political factions in this country on that issue.
But I just want to take an issue with the premise there, because you said what ultimately is going to be protected by these rights is going to be determined by the body politic. I think that's crucially misunderstanding the purpose of the rights. These rights are meant to apply as to the majority.
I know.
The reason that they're so difficult to get rid of is because it's supposed to be protection against the excesses of a majority. And there's some ANCAPs.
Yes. Thank you. Oh God, I haven't heard anybody with like a thorough understanding, a good argumentation. Yes, because think about what Tim is saying. If the whole point of the courts was just to go along with what all the people thought, we wouldn't need courts, right? We don't need courts. We would just lynch people, which is what Tim Pool is essentially saying is happening, that judges just make rulings based on what all the people, think already. Well, then we don't need courts at that point. We just lynch people. Like, it's essentially what you're describing, right? Yes.
Or anarcho-style people here that I met who like really nice people, and they understand this, right? And if you're an anarcho-capitalist, you understand this, that there are abuses that the majority of the public can do, and the rights are to stand in contradiction to what general sentiment is, and to say, no, even if Congress wants to, right? Congress shall make no law. So even if Congress would like to violate the First Amendment rights of Mahmoud Khalil, they can't. That's what the First Amendment has to protect. And they
over and over again, they violated every.
Oh my God, Tim's like.
We have a requirement, just like in the Second Amendment context, and you think the Second Amendment is important. Wasn't it important for the Supreme Court to say, in your view, that
like a good question would be here, because it would appeal to Tim's mind too, is the concept of moral progress, right? Are the laws that we have today for America better than the laws that we had 250 years ago or whatever, right? Yeah, it's gotten better, right? Have there been violations? Have there been abuses? Have there been excesses? Sure, but in general, ideally, we've worked within the framework of this Constitution to ensure more rights, more protections, everything else for Americans in general over time, right? Would you agree with that?
there is an individual right here associated with gun.
What does infringe mean?
Infringe?
Yeah.
It's gonna be different.
The right to keep and bear arms has been infringed every possible way, and we're supposed to sit here and say we have a Second Amendment. We don't. The First Amendment, they've made. How many laws are on the books pertaining to speech, religion, or otherwise? There's a ridiculous amount of them.
But is that just an excuse not to ever think about the First Amendment?
No, it's a moral philosophical point that this country tolerates what violates the Constitution if it applies to the majority, and that's not correct.
There are clear cases and there are unclear cases, right? There's a clear case of Second Amendment violation that says no, every gun ownership, that's a crime. You would say that's a clear case that reasonable minds can't disagree about. Or you're
arguing extremes instead of what we're actually.
No, but what I'm saying, but your framework where you're saying, well, who knows because the Congress is always violated. That's an excuse to never apply the principle, even clear cases.
Yes.
And here we have a clear case where you acknowledge that the First Amendment as to citizens would protect this conduct. And in fact, you would criticize Trump if he went after citizens for doing this conduct. You've also accepted, I think, as a maxim or as a general principle that resident aliens do have First Amendment rights. And so why does that not follow? Why doesn't it?
I mean, I'd like to have...
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Well, let me make one more point on this.
Yeah.
The reason I asked the question about a black man going into a bakery, the baker could say to him, I'm sorry, look, we reserve the right to refuse service to anybody. Goodbye. And what can you really do? Often in these circumstances, individuals who feel aggrieved will sue anyway, and they'll often win. Even if it actually isn't...
Whether they win or not, but that's going to depend on like a totality of circumstances. I don't know. I don't think I'm using it. I shouldn't say totality of circumstances. I don't know if I'm using it correctly. But like, I think you can demonstrate discriminatory behavior by bringing in more examples and more circumstances as well, right? Like if you show that like, oh, hey, look, this guy's used the same excuse for every single black customer, then you can try to show that in a court case, right?
Isn't the case that the person was discriminated against based on race. The issue then becomes to be racist, simply just don't admit you are. So what we have here is the INA allows them to deport Mahmoud Khalil. And so I shrug and say, change the law if you have an issue with it. But for the time being, there's nothing else to be done.
So if they said national security threat because he's a Muslim, we're deporting him, would you say the same thing?
That's the point I made about the bakery.
So would you say
No.
that? Why wouldn't you?
So this is the problem with the law as it is written. I completely think it is scripted and makes no sense. It results in people who are not racist being accused of racist, and racists actually getting away with things they're not supposed to be able to get away with.
Like if you want to talk philosophy, like because I don't think philosophy is bad, by the way, or legal philosophy is bad. But in fact, here I think it would actually be really good to speak on the well, hold on. Mahmoud Khalil wasn't deported based on the Alien Exclusion Act. Wait, I keep mixing these up. It's the Alien Exclusion Act, right? I'm never going to remember this. No, the Alien Enemies Act. Okay, he was deported based on the under the provisions of having a green card or whatever that make it so that you can deport somebody providing material support for terrorists or whatever, right? I think that this is where a little bit of foreign politics or foreign policy understanding, I think, comes in. That I've stressed this a few times, and it's largely ignored, I guess, in domestic conversations. But that the world has changed in that groups now are sometimes state actors. I've brought this up as a challenge domestically in the United States. So, for instance, when we say don't support terrorists, ordinarily that's a pretty non-objectionable statement. But when terrorists are now governments, well, now we get into a really weird world. In the United States of America, I believe, and everyone in my audience should believe, you have the right to support the North Korean government. You have the right to support Iran, you know, whatever. Like these governments are, if I think they're abhorrent or whatever, but you have the right to support them, you know, just like we have the right to protest against Vietnam. However, it can be a little bit hairier when you're talking about supporting, especially providing material support to individual groups or taking direction from individual groups. Like it gets weirder there. But when groups have now become governments of people, like Hamas has, this provides a lot of unique challenges both for international law and, in my opinion, for domestic law here. Because the question is, right, following this train of thought, if you were an immigrant of any kind in the United States, a lawful permanent resident, would you ever feel comfortable now protesting in support of the Palestinian people? I wouldn't. I would be terrified. Imagine you're at a rally for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and a few people there, you don't even realize it, but some people there have like pro-Hamas signs. Are you now subject to deportation under these immigration rules? I think the answer should be obviously no. That's not in the spirit of how that law was written, right? Destiny, I think the issue is that support is too broad. I actually don't agree that it's too broad. I want to say in the law, I think support is actually defined as material support. The public conversation we have is just that, oh, well, support just means you support them. But I don't think in the law that's how it's defined. We're just all saying that. Somebody can link it or read it if they want, but yeah.
Wait, so this is okay, New York City has human rights law that protects 31 identifiable genders. It defines in their human rights code, gender identity is self-expression. Mm-hmm. So I called a human rights lawyer, 3 of them actually, in New York. And I said, I'm trying to get an understanding of how this law would actually be applied. It says that the clothing you wear, the name you call yourself, you cannot be discriminated against in public accommodation based on these characteristics. They all agreed, yes. I had the law in front of me. I said, so if there is a clearly identifiable biological male wearing a dress with lipstick on who calls himself Susan and says he's a her, they cannot discriminate. This person gets hired for a job. They're allowed to wear female clothing. Absolutely. I said, okay, what if someone dresses up in a fursuit, a furry, and they refer to themselves as Vociferon, Herald of the Winter Mists? I'm intentionally making it
Absurd. Yeah.
They all said the courts would laugh that out of the courtroom. You'd never get through. They would fire you in 2 seconds. I said, why is a judge allowed to laugh at an individual's identity that the law supposedly protects? And they said, because the judges can interpret as they see fit. And I said, then there may as well be no law at all.
I know, but that's the conclusion there. That can't be right? Because you're saying is then judges can't interpret the provision of the
judges laugh at a transcript.
Okay, but then you're not stating your position. You're just stating basically it's a real fact that judges are going to do what judges are going to do. Indeed,
my position is this will go to a hearing, and the INA gives.
The problem is that Tim is doing the continuum fallacy as expressed by the Loki's wager story, right? Where Loki gets captured, or not captured. I think it's Loki's wager. He makes a bet with a couple of dwarves, and he loses the bet. And what he'd bet was his head. And the dwarves go to take his head, and Loki says, "You can have my head because that's what we bet, but you can't take an inch of my neck." And so they bend him over. They have the axe ready, and they're trying to figure out like, well, where does his head stop and the neck begin? And they can't determine like exactly that point. So then Loki walks. Okay, like the trickster he is. I don't know why this applies to Loki. Isn't there like a trickier god to talk about? This is like a parable. Expression of the continuum fallacy. Just because it's hard to tell when one thing becomes another thing doesn't mean that these two things aren't separate and distinct. And it doesn't mean that we would say they don't exist at all. For instance, we all agree that a grain of sand exists. We all agree that a pile of sand exists. We wouldn't call 5 grains of sand a pile of sand. We wouldn't be able to say exactly when a certain amount of grains become a pile of sand, but we do agree that these are two distinct things. Just because some judges might disagree on the edge cases doesn't mean we can throw all of it out. That's just not true. That's not how any human thinks about anything.
The Secretary of State the right to deport, and I don't see any reason why they can't do that.
Okay, so but my question.
Loki is the trickster god? Oh, in my mind, Loki just shoots lightning at people, but maybe that's... Wait, I'm thinking of Thor. Wait, who is Loki? Why do I think of Loki as lightning? Maybe just because it sounds like... Oh, no, he is the tricky guy. Never mind, just kidding. Makes sense then.
This will go to a hearing, and the INA gives Secretary of State the right to deport, and I don't see any reason why they can't do that.
Okay, so but my question for you, which you dodged, and I'm going to ask it again, is if Trump said we're deporting him because he's a Muslim, you would say
yes.
wait, so you would not condemn Trump for that?
No. You asked me if...
Would you condemn him for it?
Let me slow down.
Yeah.
You asked me if Donald Trump said we're deporting him for being a Muslim, would you object?
Condemn it.
I said yes.
Okay, why would
Did I literally say
okay,
yes?
so why would you not condemn him? So the First Amendment says...
Because he's not saying it's because he's a Muslim.
No, I understand that, but this is why. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Presumably, you would condemn him for violating the First...
Somebody says they define support as material support here, any property, tangible or intangible, or service, including currency or monetary instruments or financial securities, financial services, lodging, training, expert advice or assistance, safe houses, false documentation or identification, communications equipment. Yeah, okay. Which makes sense. We probably wouldn't want somebody in the United States providing these types of services to Al-Qaeda, right?
First Amendment for violating the religion clauses of the Constitution.
87 years ago, I actually, I thought of that. Why didn't the dwarves reverse trick Loki and say, okay, you're right, we can't figure out, we're not going to take any of your neck, we're just going to chop half your head off. Yeah, and then call it even.
No law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Presumably, you would condemn him for violating the First Amendment for violating the religion clauses of the Constitution.
I think distributing material directly made to garner support for Hamas, which was made by Hamas, should be added to material support. If you could prove that the material came directly from Hamas and then was given to them for distribution, and that the person knew that at the time they received it and distributed it, then maybe.
Establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Presumably, you would condemn him for violating the First Amendment for violating the religion clauses of the Constitution, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And the First Amendment also says, do not abridge the freedom of speech, Congress. So by the same provision, the INA that you cited says he gives the right to do it. You would condemn Trump if he cited that provision, and in part of his rationale he said, well, because he's Muslim. But if another part of the First Amendment is invoked as a rationale, now it's different. And now you're not applying that.
And my position is, and has been on the Mahmoud Khalil case, is that claiming he's aligned with Hamas is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's ridiculous. However, the INA says they can deport non-citizens.
But it also says that if they were to put up a rationale of Muslim. But you
like the rationale matters. The argument that you use here matters, right? If a police officer sees you punch somebody in the face and then you run down the street and the police officer runs and arrests you, and the police officer says, "Get over here, darky, I'm arresting you because you're black," and they arrest you, that'll get tossed.